Hi there. I'm Bob from Creation Station. Welcome to Creation Station Monthly. This is the monthly show where we talk to two creative people about a topic and see where they get into it, what have they done with it, and where do they think they're going with it. We want to see where people are moving to. This month, we're going to be talking about comics, and our people that we're going to be talking about with that are Matthew No and Hal Malinkovich. So, Matthew, tell us about yourself. Tell us about where you come from.
Hi, I'm Matthew No. I'm a librarian at Harvard Medical School. So I'm coming to comics from a reading and fandom and using comics as an educational tool kind of background.
How about you, Hal? Fill us in.
So I'm Hal Milankovic. I am kind of not really employed by anything directly. What I do is I make comics for entertainment. I put them up on the internet, and I have a Patreon where people pay monthly for bonus content and for an exclusive community. So that
Excellent.
is so sort of the whole thing is the comic.
Very nice. Very nice. So let's get into a little bit about that from you, Hal. Tell us about how did you get started with creating a comic in the first place? And Matthew, you just jump in with your own questions and feedback and forth because I want to hear how you got started with it. How did you get your inspiration to actually start? Because a lot of creative people are like, yeah, I want to do this, but they don't actually pull it off like you are.
Yeah. So I suppose I've always been drawing comics since a young age. Just sort of on line sheets of paper with pencil since elementary school, uh, and that sort of continued. I never really, I like it. Sort of continued, uh, sort of an offshoot, a direction that a lot of other creatives go in, where I didn't really continue practicing drawing. I sort of switched to like using Photoshop, sort of taking like stock photo comics, making sort of movie characters saying weird things, that sort of thing, and um, and that sort of evolved. Um, and what kind of happened is in college and undergrad, I took a class in film. I just made this like silly little short film for my final. It was this sort of comedy, like fantasy sort of parody, and that 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 sort of inspired me to make a comic around it, turn this parody thing into this whole series, and that was called Super Galaxy Knights Deluxe R, which is like an absurdly long title as part of the joke. And uh, one of the things that sort of as I continued making this comic, um, I realized that there were some weird themes that I wasn't really exploring fully, like how there was this big organization, this sort of Justice League like organization called the Galaxy Knights that like keeps peace throughout the galaxy, and how it's a little weird how much power they have and how much control they have over the galaxy, and that along with sort of my undergraduate was in computer science. My graduate was in interactive media, so I spent a lot of time in these tech companies interviewing. I won't necessarily name names, but all these different lots of startups and lots of established tech companies, and how that this company culture, seeing this company culture from slightly an outsider's perspective of someone who wants to work there, and is seeing also a lot of people walk out the door with cardboard boxes. It's like, huh. And all that together sort of led to my current comic, Steam Gear Incorporated, which is this uh, steampunk modernist action comic about a woman who's trying to be a superhero and finds out that the company she's trying to work for isn't all it's cracked up to be.
So now tell me about Matthew. You have done this from a different angle because you've tackled, instead of tackling one world like Hal, you tackled the whole genre of stuff. Fill me
Yeah,
in.
yeah. Can I ask Cal a question before I jump into that though?
Oh, go.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
So you mentioned like doing some film stuff before, and then while doing comic work and integrating that in, a lot of people talk about like animation storyboarding and comic booking kind of working together. Have you done any storyboarding kind of stuff like
Uh,
that?
yeah, actually, that's one of the things that I was into because one of the things that's sort of unique about the way I do my comics is that it's all 3D. It's all done in Blender. I make a bunch of 3D models. 'Cause I guess I never really got good at drawing, but it's sort of. But what that allows me to do is because these are all fully rigged 3D models, I can just animate them,
Okay.
and you can post animations on the internet.
Yeah.
So yeah, for Super Galaxy Nights in particular, there are just a few pages that are just like animations of like these two characters are teleporting around the city, of sword fighting, or that this character is like throwing an apple and it spins midair,
Yeah.
or whatever. So that just little animations on these pages, and I try to incorporate that in my current comic, Steam Gear Incorporated. The platform that I'm on, Webtoons, unfortunately doesn't allow you to upload animations. Uh, so that is something that I've been without, but I've also been trying to make stuff that I could just upload to like video platforms like YouTube. Little animations that
Yeah.
tie in. Like I've had a few things on TikTok as well.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. Thanks for sharing. I'm always curious how those overlap for people.
Mhm.
So Bob, you were asking me about. So I would imagine that's in leading into the medical comics, the graphic medicine kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So graphic medicine is this genre subfield, the interdisciplinary, like very academic and medically oriented group of people working in uh, sorry, how do we define it? We call it the intersection of the medium of comics and the discourse of healthcare, right? So these are comics that are talking about healthcare issues. Often they are memoirs, people telling stories in the comics medium about their experiences in the hospital or whatnot, or their family's experiences. Mom's Cancer by Brian Fees is a big, well known one for that. Start first web comic to win an Eisner, so there's a web comic element there. Um, and
And
so
yeah,
we
wait, explain that to the people who aren't paying attention. I know what an Eisner is.
Okay,
Explain what an
yeah.
Eisner is.
So the Eisner Awards are kind of like the Grammys or the Oscars for comic books. Like they're the big deal kind of award that, there's a big event every year at San Diego Comic-Con where a group of judges decide what comic is going to win the award in these categories every year.
I
And
mean,
so for
it's a huge award. If you're into gaming, if you're into role playing, it's a huge award. It is the Oscars for
yeah.
this whole vastly growing gaming industry now.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so and you kind of there's prestige involved with winning one, right? But then there's also like a sort of you're for certain going to keep your book in print if you win an Eisner Award, right?
Yeah.
Like it's almost like libraries are going to buy that book. People are going to keep it on the shelf for years and years to come. So um yeah, so graphic medicine is just this growing community of people creating and reading and sharing stories about healthcare through comics and educating people through comics as well. Um, and it can be as broad, it can be as specific as like, oh, I was in the hospital, here's what happened to me. But we also talk about stories like March by the late John Lewis, Nate Powell, and Andrew Aiden as fitting into graphic medicine because you can't really talk about healthcare in the U.S. without addressing, racism and the history of the civil rights movement and everything else. And environmental comics are starting to pop up more and more often as well, and environmental health playing a role. Um, so yeah, yeah, it's a genre. It kind of covers all of these things. And
So my question to you, Matthew, is kind of the person what Hal was talking about earlier. Moving from writing on paper versus the full-fledged TikTok animation type stuff. Where, as a person who's like collects all and archives all this sort of stuff, how does that all fit in to the genre? I mean, is that something that most people are starting off on now or doing, or is that?
Yeah, so graphic medicine is very, as a community, is very attached to Linda Berry, who's a cartoonist and MacArthur Genius Grant Award winner, and her view of cartooning and communication in general is that we all draw as kids, right? And everyone is drawing with pen and paper, and the physicality of that is important. So a lot of people in graphic medicine are starting from that pen and paper angle and eventually slowly moving kind of into digital rather than starting with digital and staying there. There are people doing that, of course, but there's still a lot of emphasis on the drawing it out first, or at least thumbnailing it out first on pen and paper before doing it digitally. But as far as I'm not so much with TikTok, I'll be honest with you. But Instagram is big for graphic medicine web comics. There you can follow that hashtag on there and have a whole feed of just those comics now, in all kinds of languages even.
Yeah, and Hal, bring us up on that one. So when you're trying to do something in that visual for they're both visual formats, right? I mean,
Yeah.
one is just a static image, one is an animated image. What's the difference going through your mind there as you're working on that as a creator for how you're going to lay that out, or how are you going to set up your panels and such like that for doing those sorts of things?
I think it's kind of an oxymoron, but for it, it it kind of feels like for still comics there has to be more movement in the panels because with an animation, especially a short animation, I can just have like a static shot straightforward, characters walking in and out of frame, and the background doesn't really change. Whereas for comics, if you notice more if things get repeated, you get to look back more, and there's not as much of a static sense of time progressing. So if you want to have that sense of motion, you got to have more weird camera angles, more things from above, more like slight movements between panels that you necessarily wouldn't need if a character is just talking. So that is a difference in approach, I find.
That time element I think is key, right? Like in when you're reading a comic, the reader is kind of controlling, the pace of interaction with things in a way. Whereas animation, it's you hit play and I mean you can watch it at 2 times speed or something, I guess. But like animation, the creator is setting the pace entirely, right?
Yes, and that is sort of a question I have for you. Do you find that there are people who don't know how to read comics? Because like something that I've found talking to people, especially with my older comics, is that they don't understand, how to read from this panel to this panel, which way to have the eye flow. In my current comic, Steam Gear Incorporated, it's completely vertical.
Yeah.
So that's a bit easier for people because you just scroll. It's like reading a news feed on a phone. But I'm curious, in the world of graphic medicine and graphic novels in general, do you have that issue of people not knowing necessarily how to
Yeah.
read it?
We definitely do run into people who don't know how to read comics because I mean it's kind of comics have their own set of grammar rules, right? Like it's kind of like learning how to read another language in a way. And so if you didn't grow up doing it, where you were absorbing those rules kind of just with the Sunday funnies or by just picking it up from reading Superman all the time. Um, So we get a lot of like, 20 something med students who don't really know how to get into a comic. And there are some creators who have created like how-to guides for reading a comic, and sometimes we'll just try to read them together. But and it gets really messy because our Western convention is typically left, right, top, bottom. Manga's become so big now that we have to flip that and explain to people, no, it's the other way around. At least in manga published true to form, some publishers still flip it. But the vertical thing is a whole new world altogether, right?
Yeah.
With
And
your
we've
infinite
got
scroll, yeah.
yeah. And does that make it more? So you've made them both ways before, right? So
Mhm.
do you find the infinite scroll confining in any way? Like, does it change how
Um,
you can tell the story, or?
it definitely changes how you can tell the story because um, because to a certain extent, when you're doing sort of like traditional page by page, you kind of want all the pages to be the same size,
Hmm.
which means uh, let's say I have 6 panels per page, 3 times a week. That will be it's hard to have like if there's just one really big panel, then people are feeling, hey, there wasn't that much today. If there's a bunch of information I need to convey today, that's a bunch of really small panels that I've got to cram in. But whereas for the vertical format, there's no rule on how long it is,
Hmm.
so I can just keep going forever. So I can make really big panels. I can make lots of small panels that have space between them for dialogue. So in that sense, it's more freeing. Um, that it is somewhat restrictive to like never have panels side by side. I do occasionally, like
Yeah.
if two characters are reacting to the same thing, I'll have 2 panels side by side, even in the infinite scroll format. Um, but for the most part, it is honestly like it is a more open way
Yeah.
of creating comics.
So I want to
I
come back to Matthew. I want before we get too far off of this one, I got
Yes.
a couple questions more about terminology type stuff because we've got a lot of people who listen to this who are not going to know these things. So when I say the word comic, I am of almost of the generation which means that was in the paper and it was 3 or 4 small boxes after one after another versus okay, comic books versus graphic novels versus manga slash what's the other term?
Manhwa is a Korean
Manga.
one.
Manga and there's another one out there.
Yeah,
Librarians use.
manhwa is a Korean term, and webtoon is also a Korean term that for vertical comics, but it's also the term for the company that releases them in America. So it's a little
So
confusing, but
tell me about how those terms all intersect or where they come from. Like, could I do a manga in a quote unquote traditional 4 panel comic in the newspaper as long as it was going from left to right? Could that be? Is that manga? Is that a comic? Is that a what?
So yeah. So manga is really it's the Japanese term for comics, really fundamentally, and it comes with its own kind of tropes. Like, so there are specific like um, gags that you'll see in manga that you don't normally see in Western comics. They do traditionally run that that left or right to left, because that's the way Japanese is written. Um, yeah, and I mean, like, I would never say that I am going to go create a manga as a 30-year-old white guy in the United States, right? Most of the manga you're going to see is translations from Japanese created work.
Okay.
Um, so when I say comics, so I guess me personally, when I say comics, I'm talking about everything we just listed, right? Comics is the umbrella term that encompasses all of these things. A comic with no s, right, is probably going to be a single panel or those things that you see in the paper still, every now and then papers still have comics in them, I guess. You might also call those a cartoon, like a single panel cartoon. Um, Graphic novels is usually meant as a term to mean like a bound book. It's kind of misleading because they're not necessarily all novels. It just gets used for any traditionally bound and printed thing. So, uh, Watchmen counts as a graphic novel, and so does what's one on my
Mouse.
shelf? Mouse. Mouse also counts as a graphic novel, and those are very definite. Mouse is definitely not a fictional work, right? Um,
Also is about the Holocaust, in case
yeah,
anybody's not
yeah, yeah.
familiar with that
Sorry,
word.
yeah.
Librarians were all just like, yeah, the other thing is graphic novels and comics count as reading. If
Yeah.
if your young adult wants to read a graphic novel, that counts as reading.
Yes.
It's learning how to take in information, and as we just showed, it's a skill that I probably don't have the right skill set to be able to handle some of these more modern types of things that I haven't been introduced to.
And there are very different levels of reading difficulty for these too, right? Like Mouse, a memoir about the Holocaust, is an incredibly, I would say that's a difficult book to read, both because of the content and the way that it's constructed. Like the way that it's paneled out and the way that the story flows is really complex. But then you could read, there are a great kids comic is this series called Bone by Jeff Smith. Like I love that comic. Um, but it's, you know, it's meant for a young like 8-year-old audience. It's a lot easier to follow. The comics are very more simplistically drawn. You could probably hand it to anyone and they could figure out, if you give them a minute, they could figure out the flow of the panels and the artwork and everything. Um, so it's not just all comics are not necessarily created equal, but they are all reading.
Yes.
So, Hal, I want to start you off with this next question. Along the lines where we were just going is, what do you think society as a whole out there thinks about this as a field, thinks about what you're doing? Do you get the, oh, you're just drawing reaction? Or, I mean, it
I
takes skill
think,
to use Blender to create
yeah.
these things. So
I think people understand what I'm
by the
doing.
way, Hal, I guess we should actually explain what Blender is. Also,
Yeah,
Blender's a 3D
Blender.
rendering program that we use in Creation Station here to do 3D modeling, to do 3D printers, all, you know, virtual reality, augmented reality stuff. Blender's a high level stuff that you're using to create a web comic out of, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, Blender is, it's not the industry standard. I think that's still Maya, which is another 3D software. But Blender is like basically does everything. It's this big, I mean, and it's free is the big thing. It's
Oh,
free, open source. Anyone can do it. I myself have coded shaders to, because I want my comic to look a specific way. I had to program shaders to use in Blender. You don't have to do that if you're using it. It's very easy to use if you're just getting into it. But I think people get that what I'm doing is difficult. I think people, especially people who aren't used to comics, people who are new to comics, look at my comic and go, "Wow, that looks like it was difficult for you to make," because of because how much 3D lets me play with the detail a lot more than 2D artists would be able to do for the same schedule. But
What, when you say the word schedule there, how much time does it take you?
um, I mean, there is it's about 20, 25 panels per week. Um, in terms of how much time I actually spend on it, uh, definitely multiple like full days of work per week. Sometimes pages are shorter, so they don't have as much on them. But yeah, that is it is more or less a full-time job, and I think people, especially people who aren't used to comics, understand that it's a full-time thing. As far as whether people think it's worthy of a career, I think people know that there is a career to be made in comics because in the past few decades, there's been so many movies there's been so many movies with Spider-Man in them. There's so many movies with Avengers in them that I think people get that comics are a big business now. Um, I think people are surprised that anyone can. I think that's a surprise to people. And when I show them, no, these people are just posting it online for free, getting donations from fans, and they are making 100,000 a year. These are what people can do this.
Yeah.
So that is something I think surprises a lot of people.
How about you, Matthew? I mean, you're not creating them yourself, but you've got a huge interest in this. Where do you think, in librarianship in particular, where do you think that's how the rest of the field thinks about you when you're out there doing this kinds of things?
Well, so I think we've made, I think librarianship has made a lot of progress with this. I wasn't in the field 25 years ago, but I have read, prior articles and have seen, libraries were not always as welcoming of comics as I think they should have been. And a lot of librarians, along with other educators, had this same view we're fighting today, that some people don't think it's reading, right? But now we have, we're going on 6 years, I want to say. We've had the graphic novels and comics roundtable in the American Library Association, where we've got like 1,100 librarians together in this group, who are all like advocating for comics to have a place in libraries, and we put together like reading lists and best of lists and webinars, like, educating librarians about how to collect comics and to program with them. So and we largely get positive reception nowadays when we go out and do this stuff. With I suppose, the exception of, you saw the very first thing on that banner you showed was
Uh-huh.
the guide to preparing for and addressing challenges to comics. But
Yes, the
that's a
library
whole,
world is full of challenges right now.
yeah, that's a whole can of worms. But comics themselves have been particularly vulnerable to this, because images are very powerful and can be taken out of context without, they can be taken out of context easily. We'll put it that way. And so
Yeah.
we have to be knowledgeable and prepared. And I mean, I sometimes fall back on. I mean, I am a health sciences librarian who is doing comics librarianship at a medical school, where I have medical students and faculty reading and creating comics, right? Like, so if we can do it in a medical school setting, I think we can say it's probably fair to use in any setting.
Fill me in on that a little bit more, because my next question for you both is really, what is the one I always ask this of everybody. What's the one thing that you've created that you're most proud of? That something that you made or did that you feel
Yeah.
like this is a good representation. Where does that fall in for you, Matthew? And we'll let Hal think about which one really sparked his.
Yeah, so beyond the general like building of a collection, right, for people to use, I've had the opportunity to teach a couple of like week-long electives to medical students about graphic medicine and comics in general. And so we do this thing. Well, I we read comics as a group and discuss them and do all that academic kind of stuff. But it's also their final project for the week, is they have to turn in a couple of page comic memoir that they're creating from an experience during their time in the clinic. This is during that period of medical education where the students are working in the hospital as training. Um, and so these are students who have largely never written a comic before, never drawn a comic before. And so through the week, we're doing drawing exercises and writing exercises, and really getting them out of their shell, comfortable doing this kind of stuff. Um, and
So I have to draw.
you do have to draw, and that's so
One of
this.
my favorite comics is Irregular Web Comic that uses Legos to
Oh yeah,
represent like I could do
Yeah.
this. I could be like, here's a
yeah,
little hospital bed, here's my nursing, here's my
yeah.
doc. I can think this through real quick and say, okay, I can make a comic like that.
You can see, and then you just take the photos of it, right, and put it together in the order and
Yeah, yeah.
another.
I,
So
I
that's
mean,
technically called
I've talked.
novella, right? Like that's another kind of comic.
Yeah, I mean, I've actually talked to the creator of a regular webcomic, David Morgan Marr.
Yeah.
It's it's a lot more. in depth than it seems to take
Yeah.
like to take these like especially since he's got like multiple storylines all like crisscrossing ahead of time. It's like a uh, like the writing difficulty
Yeah.
Yeah.
along with just having the camera, making sure it's focused, making sure everything is posed properly, making sure you have all the sets built.
Maybe it's
It's a
kind of
whole
like
process.
maybe it's kind of like claymation, where it's a lot more difficult than we think it is, right?
Yeah.
I can't even begin to think about that part of it. Oh my goodness. So Hal, tell us what's your triumph? What are you most proud of?
Biggest triumph is difficult to quantify in terms of in terms of comics. I think the fact that I have written full stories, not even any of them individually, but I would say the fact that I have gotten this far, the fact that I have 1,000 pages on Super Galaxy Nights, all these different milestones, over 50 updates on Steam Gear Incorporated. I think that is what I would say the legacy is that if someone years from now, I remember I remember when I was younger, just like occasionally coming across a comic someone made and abandoned, years earlier, but it was still like this complete story that you could go through and engage with the characters. And even if people stopped reading today, if sometime like 10 years down the line, someone would come back and read it, that is the fact that it's up there to
Mhm.
read is my I think my biggest accomplishment.
Matthew, I know this is you're in a little bit more specialized thing, but for our librarians, are there libraries out there that are archiving this kind of stuff? Physical items, yes. Digital items,
So the Library of Congress is actually working on, like, they have a web comics archive. I'm not 100% sure how complete it is or what the scoping of all of it on the minutia level is, but I know it exists and they're working on it.
that's a good thing. Yeah, because I mean, and by the way, one of the places you can do a lot of these things online. If you don't have physical comics near you at your library, Hoopla, as an example of an app that most libraries have access to that can get you access into all these different in digital format. You can read it on your Kindle or read it on your iPad, etc., and stuff like that. Although the new Kindle is really nice. I've got the Scribe with the much bigger screen. Yeah, it fits just right for you guys both. I'm gonna have to bring up Hal's on mine and see if I can bring it up on the web browser and see how it reacts on e-ink, how stuff like that does.
Yeah, I mean, how does it handle color?
It doesn't do color. It's just grayscale because it's regular e-ink. So it
Yeah.
just does the grayscale. But I mean, on other websites that I've been to, it works fairly well. I'm gonna have to go investigate that and see how it handles. It obviously wouldn't handle motion because it doesn't do video.
Yeah.
But for your standard one, I'm pretty sure it would work.
I
Yeah.
got one of these new like open up phones, and it works pretty well for that stuff. So
For the new large ones, yeah, that's great. So I want to hear, and Matthew, I'm going to give Hal the first one, but I want you to think about this because it's different. We always ask, what kind of dream gear would you want as you're starting off? As part of this question is, so what kind of equipment did you start with? And then what's your dream piece of equipment that you want for all this, Hal? What did you start off? You said paper and pencil way
Yeah,
back when.
yeah, way back when, paper and pencil. Uh, I mean, I've used basically the same physical equipment, barring machine upgrades, since I was in middle school. Just, a computer, in this case a Mac, doesn't really matter, and some software. In this case, Adobe products. Like Photoshop and Illustrator and stuff. And I've basically used the same stuff
Your
for as long as
dream,
I
come on
can.
now. Dream big. What would you
and
possibly
no, but
want?
and then before moving into Blender, in terms of what I could possibly want, I mean, the thing is, I mean, some sort of I wouldn't necessarily say artificial intelligence. Perhaps algorithm is more uh in line with what I'm thinking of, but something to propagate. If I'm building a 3D environment in Blender using my own art style, so not necessarily stuff that's downloaded from the internet,
Yeah.
for instance, which other people have done. But but like if I have, I make a mountain, now I would like 100 more mountains like that, and I would also like it to not take a year to render.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
So,
How close
so
is it
that
to being in VR or AR to do a comic like that nowadays? How close do you think?
to do a comic in VR or AR, I've actually while I was doing my master's in interactive media, this was actually something I looked into. Having using AR goggles to have the sort of comic windows in the world that you can look into. Um, it's
That's a
possible. It's
nice
just
idea. I like
yeah.
that. Like having the picture frame and it's there, and if what you
Mhm.
have to stick your head right through the frame to see the stuff around that's hiding behind. That's a really nice
Yeah,
idea. I like that.
yeah. I
I
mean,
know of
it's
one
possible.
AR. Yeah, there's an AR app that does that. That was on HoloLens. That's really nice. That's a great idea.
Yeah, it's the answer is it's technologically possible. It's just who has HoloLenses, uh, and who's making them, because someone's got to make money somewhere,
Yeah,
and that's what it comes down to.
that's interesting. How about you, Matthew? Tell us what do you think about as your ultimate? Because you could when you got started in this with graphic medicine, you started
Yeah.
with just what did you start with?
I mean, I was just like curious about if we could use comics for patient education, right? uh, Turns out the answer is yes. But I mean, so on that front, I guess the dream would be to actually be like legally allowed to use comics for patient education. Like, I have a colleague who's working on trying to get consent forms like turned into comics, right? You would still sign the actual like legal binding language version of it, right? But then you would also be given this comic in like layman's term that you could actually understand what you were agreeing to. But it's this
I
big,
want that. Yeah. Hey,
yeah,
yeah. Make that happen, please.
I mean,
but it's this
that's
huge hurdle, right? I do have a technological wish though. So I have these cool. There's these short story dispensers, right? That some libraries have now. We have a couple of them at Countway, and they can print comics now, and they're vertical, right? But they're all black and white. So what I would love to be able to do is somehow connect one of these dispensers to print in color and to partner and pull some of these webtoon vertical comics out of it, right? So that people could get like different issues of
Yeah.
the webtoons right in the library. That would be cool.
That's a nice little thing. I like that.
definitely being
Hmm.
having more access to printing, that sort of thing is very nice.
Yeah.
And I'm
And you were
thinking,
talking
yeah,
about the vertical.
I
there's got to be a color receipt printer out there.
Yeah, there's got to be.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, it's really interesting thinking of um, like consent forms in this sort of graphic medicine, graphic novel sort of form. Like, I mean, that's basically in-flight safety instructions, right? Basically,
It's an IKEA book. Yeah,
or
yeah,
yeah, IKEA, right?
yeah.
So sort of the the pictures, it helps. It helps people figure stuff out that they otherwise wouldn't be able to.
That's a really ingenious idea. I like it.
How you were talking about, we keep mentioning this vertical thing. So now I'm just imagining, uh, how would you like if someone, I want someone to start printing, publishing these webtoon infinite scroll kind of vertical comics as scrolls, right? Like, let's bring back the scroll so we can have
Yes.
10 versions of this stuff.
Right. I mean that would be that would be pretty like you gotta scroll, you gotta a dowel and some
Could be
screws to
done. Yeah,
hold it on.
doing that, even just I'm picturing it as a bound book where it's just unfold all the pages so that you've got the whole strip, and then you fold it back up and go to the next, and
Yeah,
now you've
Yeah.
got that would.
like an
Huh.
accordion.
See, we got brand new platforms for people to go out there and explore and create on now.
Yeah.
Oh man, oh man, oh man, oh man. So here's the question of the hour for us that I always try and get in is, what is your biggest failure? Because we always try to talk about the idea people are creative, everybody hits a roadblock, everybody, we've talked about successes because we want to celebrate successes. Always try to celebrate the defeats, the roadblocks, the problem ones, to say, look, this was a massive problem and we had to get over it, and this is what I did. Or maybe it's just, okay, I found a way, it just didn't work and I needed to do something else. What do you think about that, Matthew? What do you think is the biggest failure we've got so far there? And
Um, I mean, I mean, I've personally had this problem, and I think it's one that we're facing with the whole idea of graphic medicine, right? Is getting the funding to pay creators to do this work with us, right?
yeah,
So I've helped coordinate a couple of projects that then the funding falls through, and then it's like, oh well, how are we going to pay anybody? Because people are there's this people are always asking artists to work for free, right? And so we've got to figure out these funding mechanisms. Otherwise, this is going to go nowhere. So yeah, I would consider that I have failed at this, and I know the field in general is still failing at this. So that's we've got to learn and make this work. And there are ways to fund it. We've done it successfully. It's just we've got to keep it going.
yeah. Hal, you mentioned Patreon. In case anyone's not familiar, Patreon is a way of subscribing to creative people, for them to put out. I belong to 15, 20 different Patreons that I have. Give them $1, $5, whatever it is. Some of them are free, where it's just you're helping support the artist, and you get a chance to interact and do. I've got people who make maps for my D&D game. It's great.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
Oh
So
yeah.
Hal, tell me about that. Tell me about you've solved at least a little bit of the funding problem, but what's the big failure as an artist?
So it's interesting because web comics are in a unique space where it's kind of like television but faster because with television, like like when you compare to movies, right? Like movies, they spend a few years making it, they release it, and then they wait for the reviews to come in. Whereas with television, that it's turned around a lot quicker. Sometimes for certain television shows, there might be a couple months between when it's filmed and when it's posted, and web comics are like an even faster version of that. So where the pages I post this week were drawn last week, right? And one consequence of that is that there's a lot of feedback. There's open comment sections, so there's feedback from people who don't like it. you know, I try to draw it like I started out Super Galaxy Nights actually drawing it. I tried to do it in a weird style, sort of a uh, like it wasn't very good, but sort of more a sketchy style, and that was something that people just didn't like. It didn't really fit the world, the story that was trying to be told. And there are other times where I've been told like for an action scene that happens, hey, this was weirdly violent. This was person got cut in half unexpectedly. I did not see that coming. That was weird for me. And that is something I might have to rewrite the script that I have for 2 years in advance, uh, so that these sort of scenes that people don't like don't show up, because that is sort of the thing, is that it's not just art that I'm putting out there, it's also a business. And the customers are the readers who want to stay subscribed, and have to remain happy. There's some things I won't compromise about the story because frankly, if you don't like some of the things I'm putting in there, then you probably aren't the right audience for this. But yeah, there's definitely things where the readers complained about it. Uh, Perhaps not necessarily en masse. I haven't I haven't been trending on Twitter, thankfully, but it could happen someday, and that would be the answer to my biggest failure if it ever happened. But just the smaller scale.
And Matthew,
I like it.
feed in on that for me because Hal just casually mentions cutting somebody in half. And then I'm like, wait a minute, Matthew does all these medical things. There better be a lot of blood and pretty explicit images in some of these things. Maybe I'm getting it wrong.
Well, some of them, but so yeah, that's actually so. I often have to explain the graphic part when we talk about graphic medicine because we don't really mean gory and blood squirting everywhere.
Right.
Some comics are drawn more realistically than others, but most of the time people are using, you know, a visual metaphor, right? They're coming up with some creative talk about a pain that you see,
Oh,
like
We just lost your
yeah,
audio
you just
there,
lost your
Matthew.
audio. I think you just cut out for a bit.
am I back?
Yes, you are. Now you're back.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. There's usually not as much like gore and violence in graphic medicine as you might think. Often, so you'll have like someone's getting ready to be cut into with a scalpel, right? You'll see the scalpel come, but then there's a panel break, and you're just left to know that that's what happened, rather than having to see an
Everything
entire
takes place off
operation.
stage left.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's one of the benefits of the comic, right? You don't have to visually see every step. You can
Yeah.
put together what happened in that gap.
Nice. Yeah. I was just thinking about it. I'm certain that there are medical texts that have some pretty intense imagery in there. And I was thinking, how do you translate that to, because the stuff you have is available or, okay, here we go. Here's one of the bad things about thinking these things. I've got an expert to ask. So Matthew, how do I get a hold of some of the comics that you've got there in your space? Are these things that are available to the general public or are they only available?
So most of our collection are things that are available to everybody. Your public library probably has, some of them, maybe not all of them, right? Because some of them are put out by like university presses that are less likely to be picked up by a public library, but they could buy them if they wanted. Many of them are from traditional comics publishers. Abrams puts out a lot of stuff. Fantagraphics has some graphic medicine, right? But there are some things that are created like by medical groups that they only print like 100 of, and I try to grab a hold of them, but they're not usually super available. Yeah, but so for the most part, anyone could come and read these things, and you can always like through the magic of interlibrary loan, most people can borrow things from our library.
That'll be interesting there. Hal, how about you? I showed your website. We'll show it up again. And in the link in the show notes, we'll put links to all these places in the show notes for you. But how do you make your stuff more available?
I mean, as far as visibility, it's about as available as it could be because it's free to read. And I got a domain, steamgearinc.com. But I mean, it's marketing. Marketing takes about as much time as the drawing part of it. I've got it on Twitter, I've got it on Instagram, got it on TikTok, I've got it on YouTube, got it on Facebook, just all the different sites. Not all of them people go to, but you gotta splash it everywhere. Reddit, I also post on. There are communities who like steampunk stories, so.
And I know
That sort of
Matthew
thing.
already touched on this earlier, and we'll reiterate with Matthew in a moment. But Hal, tell us about how does this being creative in the field lead to an actual career? I mean, you've been drawing, you've been doing stuff. Are you at that level yet? You mentioned, some people on Patreon are making 100,000. I'm
Yes.
guessing you're not there yet.
Uh,
But tell me, I mean, as a career type thing, What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think if the goal is to be a career, it you have to have a lot of dedication and you have to be willing to do it for a very long time without uh, having having that high income, because those creators I mentioned on Patreon, comic creators who are making 100,000 a year, they've been doing it since the 2000s, right? So this is like 10 coming on 20 years that they've been creating comics. There are people more recently. Webtoon has originals that they hire people for. And Amazon, I believe, hires for their digital comics, Comixology, I believe it's called. But that's more closer to traditional publishing. In terms of the staking it out on your own, I mean, it's doable, right? I started Steam Gear Incorporated in February. I opened up the Patreon in March, and I've got a little bit of change. Not necessarily enough for
I'm not paying the
for a
mortgage
full
yet, but
living, but yeah,
it's a little bit, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And I think that's how
So
it just
so
goes.
so yeah, I think it's just having the dedication to stick with something for a very long time, having the dedication to keep improving, to ask for uh, people to say, "Hey, what's wrong with this? What can I fix?" Uh, the dedication to not miss a week. I haven't missed a single week since I started, except for the planned 1 week breaks between chapters, which I had stuff to go up in there. I had character bios and stuff, but just that dedication. I mentioned that I talked to David Morgan Marr. It was actually quite a long time ago. I think 2018 that I asked for him on advice on how this works as a business. And one thing he told me is that yeah, he just doesn't do anything else. This is his one like hobby basically. Like it started out as his only hobby. He did it exclusively that daily, for years, and it became his whole thing.
How about you, Matthew? And in librarianship, you've got a real good specialty niche going on, but so how would people go into this as a career on the other side, just as a collector slash archivist sort of person,
Specifically, the medical
or
comics,
any of it,
or
or
I
any of
mean,
it? Just being
yeah,
comic. You do all. I know you. You do more than just the medical stuff on your own.
I do way too many things, right? So I mean, librarianship is like most library positions require a master's degree, so you go through education, science, and you can start out working part time in libraries to get your foot in the door and get that experience and everything. If you're wanting to do, comics librarianship, right? Whether it's medical or in a public library or in a school library, it's really you gotta be willing to read a lot of things, be willing to read widely. Like I read superheroes and nonfiction and manga and like basically every genre, except I don't really love like true crime stuff, so I don't read true crime comics so much. But like there's a genre, every genre that's out there exists in comics, and it's really useful to know about a little bit about all of them if you're going to be doing comics work, whether it's as a librarian or as an archivist, right? Um, and kind of like try to get to know. I try to pitch starting local, right? Get to know what the scene of Brown Comics is where you are. So in Massachusetts, like we have the Massachusetts Independent Comics Expo, which is our little local version of Comics Con, and it's fantastic. It's my favorite con every year, and so you get to meet local creators, and you get to know what people are reading around you. And then you can kind of scale that up if you do want to go to San Diego. Sure, it's fun. It's a lot, but it can be fun. Uh, but so it's kind of like and there are so many different ways to come at it, right? Like, are you into the fandom stuff? Then San Diego might be useful because then you can connect comics with cosplay and do programming events that way. Are you into like high art kind of stuff? Then okay, local cons could work for you, and then you could bring in like the fancy creators because there is a high art kind of version of comics too. Do you like animation? Then like bring Hal in and talk about animation and cartooning and how they mesh together, right? That's another benefit of the local scene. You can get to know the creators in the area and do partnerships and programming. And I'm just kind of rambling. I could keep going on and on.
Great. No.
Yeah.
That, that,
No,
that, that
I
fills
think
in a lot of curious. Go, Hal.
yeah, I think it's sort of one mistake that I see a lot of creators make in the webcomics space when they're just starting out. They're like, I'm going to make a webcomic. It's going to be the next big thing. It's going to be bigger than what's a really big
Lore
webcomic? Bigger than
Olympus.
Lore Olympus, bigger than Tower of God, bigger than One Punch Man, right? And I think a mistake that a lot of these creators make is they are so focused on their own ambition that they don't realize that your best readers, your best critics, your best friends in this space when you need to commiserate about boy, it's been 12 hours making this page. Uh, just everything is other creators who are making these web comics. There are hundreds of thousands right now. There who are the
Yeah.
same size as you, who are just starting out. Find those people, talk to them, learn from them, read their stuff because they have a lot of interesting perspectives that you can learn from in their comics. You know, I wouldn't be where I was if I didn't read other web comics. Some from creators much bigger than me, some from my peers. So you know that's an important part. You've got
I think you nailed it right. There's our ending right there, Hal. Thank you so much, Chad. Listen to your fellow creatives. There we go. I'm going to thank you both for being here. This was a really fun conversation. I think that I'm going to probably get a couple of people asking me about this, and I'll put your contact information there in the show notes for them. If there is someone you'd like to see featured or a theme for an upcoming month, you can always reach out to us, creationstation@broward.org. Thank you guys all very much for being here this month, and we'll see you next month.